In a seemingly ordinary neighborhood, a young boy named Jeffrey Dahmer grew up with a morbid fascination that would later lead him down a path of infamy. His name would become synonymous with some of the most heinous crimes in American history. But what factors contributed to his transformation into a notorious serial killer? Childhood curiosities. Jeffrey Dahmer was born in Milwaukee on May 21, 1960, to Lionel and Joyce Dahmer. As a child, he was described as energetic and happy until a significant event at the age of 4. After undergoing surgery to correct a double hernia, Dahmer's demeanor changed. He became noticeably subdued and increasingly withdrawn, especially after the birth of his younger brother and the family's frequent relocations. By the time Dahmer reached school age, the family had settled in Ohio. From his youngest years, Dahmer exhibited a peculiar fascination with the anatomy of animals. He wasn't just content with observing them, he felt a compulsion to dissect them. He would collect large insects and even the skulls of small animals, preserving them meticulously in jars filled with formaldehyde. This behavior was documented in the book The Shrine of Jeffrey Dahmer by Brian Masters. As he grew older, this interest took a darker turn. Dahmer began to dissect roadkill, trying to understand the inner workings of these creatures. His father, Lionel Dahmer, perhaps thinking this was a budding interest in science, once assisted his son in bleaching animal bones. Little did he know, these were the early signs of Jeffrey's disturbing tendencies. By his early teens, Dahmer's behavior became even more concerning. He became disengaged, tense, and largely friendless. Around the age of 14, Dahmer's compulsions began to evolve. He started having thoughts of necrophilia and murder. Some speculate that the breakdown of his parents' tumultuous marriage and their bitter divorce might have been a catalyst that pushed these dark thoughts into actions. The constant tension and arguments in the Dahmer household made Jeffrey question the stability of his family and his place in it. Furthermore, Dahmer began drinking heavily at 14. This addiction would plague him throughout his life, further exacerbating his isolation and dark compulsions. By the time he committed his first murder at 18, his life was already spiraling out of control. The tumultuous Dahmer household. Jeffrey Dahmer grew up in a home that was far from the picture-perfect image of family life. The atmosphere was thick with tension, primarily stemming from the strained relationship between his parents. Joyce Dahmer, Jeffrey's mother, faced her own battles with mental health. Her struggles with depression and anxiety were well documented, and these issues often cast a shadow over the household. The constant disagreements and conflicts between Joyce and Lionel, Jeffrey's father, only added to the unease. Joyce's mental health challenges were not the only source of instability. The marriage between her and Lionel was marked by frequent arguments and disagreements. Their eventual decision to divorce further shook the foundations of Jeffrey's world, leaving him grappling with feelings of abandonment and confusion. Joyce Dahmer, a mother in turmoil. The role of Joyce Dahmer in her son's life has been a topic of much debate and speculation. Some argue that her mental health issues, combined with the volatile family environment, played a significant role in shaping Jeffrey's deviant behavior. However, Jeffrey himself has painted a different picture, asserting that he had a loving upbringing and that his parents cared for him deeply. Despite this claim, Joyce was consumed by guilt and self-doubt after the horrifying extent of her son's crimes came to light. She constantly questioned her actions as a mother and wondered if there was anything she could have done differently. The weight of her son's actions and the public scrutiny that followed took a heavy toll on her mental and emotional well-being. In a revealing interview in 1993, Joyce challenged the prevailing narrative about her son's childhood. Contrary to claims that Jeffrey was a shy and withdrawn child, Joyce insisted that there were no clear warning signs of the monster he would become. She spoke of her son's fatalistic attitude after his sentencing, revealing his bleak outlook on life and his future. The weight of guilt. The aftermath of Jeffrey's arrest and the subsequent revelations about his heinous crimes were devastating for Joyce. She grappled with overwhelming guilt, constantly tormented by the thought that she might have played a role, however indirect, in her son's descent into darkness. This guilt drove her to the brink, leading her to attempt suicide. Her suicide note, discovered after her attempt, spoke of her deep love for both her sons, Jeffrey and David, and her profound sense of loneliness. The horrifying acts. Jeffrey Dahmer, often referred to as the Milwaukee Cannibal or the Milwaukee Monster, was an American serial killer and sex offender who committed the murders and dismemberment of 17 males between 1978 and 1991. His crimes were not just limited to murder. Many of his later offenses involved necrophilia and cannibalism. Dahmer's actions were so gruesome that he often preserved parts of his victims, typically parts of their skeletons. The first known victim of Dahmer's dark desires was Stephen Mark Hicks, who was almost 19 years old. In 1978, Dahmer lured Hicks to his house with the promise of a few beers. After spending several hours together, when Hicks wanted to leave, Dahmer didn't want him to. Not wanting his companion to depart, Dahmer bludgeoned Hicks with a dumbbell. After the murder, Dahmer went on to dissect Hicks' body in his basement. He later buried the remains in his backyard. Weeks later, he exhumed the body, dissolved the flesh in acid, and crushed the bones, scattering them in the woods behind his home. Dahmer's pattern of luring young men, often exploiting their vulnerabilities, became a recurring theme in his crimes. He would often drug his victims, making them helpless before committing his heinous acts. The sight of his victims stirred something dark within Dahmer. He was not just satisfied with killing, he wanted to dominate, control, and possess his victims in every way possible. The number of victims kept increasing. 17 young men lost their lives at the hands of Dahmer. Each victim had a story, dreams, and families who mourned their loss. The community was in shock when the extent of Dahmer's crimes came to light. How could someone commit such acts? What drove him to such depths of depravity? The aftermath. The discovery of Dahmer's crime sent shockwaves throughout the country. As details of his gruesome acts emerged, the public struggled to comprehend the magnitude of his actions. Dahmer's modus operandi was not just limited to murder. He was also involved in necrophilia and cannibalism. His victims, primarily young men and boys, were lured into his apartment under various pretenses, only to meet a tragic end. The investigation into Dahmer's activities revealed a meticulously organized operation. He would often photograph his victims at various stages of their demise, keeping these images as morbid trophies. Furthermore, he preserved parts of his victims' bodies, either in his refrigerator or in acid-filled vats, showcasing a chilling level of detachment and depravity. The trial that followed his arrest was one of the most closely watched in American history. As the prosecution presented its case, the courtroom and the nation heard testimonies that were both harrowing and heart-wrenching. Families of the victims took the stand, recounting their agonizing search for their loved ones and the devastating moment they learned of their fate. Forensic experts detailed the evidence, painting a picture of a man who had lost all sense of humanity. The defense, on the other hand, attempted to portray Dahmer as a deeply troubled individual, plagued by mental illnesses that drove him to commit these acts. They argued that he was a product of a broken home and had suffered abuse in his childhood, factors that contributed to his descent into madness. However, the jury was not swayed. Recognizing the gravity of his crimes and the threat he posed to society, they found him guilty. Dahmer was sentenced to 16 life terms, a decision that many believed was a fitting punishment for the pain and suffering he had inflicted on so many. While incarcerated, Dahmer expressed some remorse for his actions, claiming that he wished he could undo the harm he had caused. However, any chance of redemption or rehabilitation was cut short in 1994. In a twist of fate, Dahmer met his end at the hands of a fellow inmate who took his life in a prison altercation. In the aftermath of his death, Dahmer's name remains synonymous with evil. His story serves as a grim reminder of the depths to which the human psyche can sink, and the importance of remaining vigilant to protect the most vulnerable members of society. For Joyce Dahmer, the pain and guilt were overwhelming. She grappled with the reality of her son's actions, leading her to attempt suicide. Despite her anguish, she sought to make a positive impact later in life, working with HIV and AIDS patients. The story of Jeffrey Dahmer is a chilling testament to the complexities of the human mind. It raises questions about nature versus nurture, the impact of family dynamics, and the signs that often go unnoticed until it's too late. As we reflect on his life and crimes, we must strive to understand the factors that can lead someone down such a dark path and work towards preventing such tragedies in the future.